Spice.
Our guest is in the hot seat. She's told us that, I've never been on radio before, so please be kind to me. So we have assigned Mark Bichachi those duties this morning. And he will, I promise. He'll be nice. But we have to say a very warm welcome to Rimsha Firozdin. She's an Associate Legal and Transitional Justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm all right. What about you?
We are well, thank you. I speak for myself. Are you well?
You said we are well. You speak for us.
Okay, but
Yeah.
these gentlemen.
We established that at 6 a.m.
At 6 a.m. We confirmed.
Yes.
We are well. Thank you so much.
That's great.
We'll be looking at child rights and labor law. And it comes into something I think we come into contact with, but we don't realize or recognize or acknowledge as often as we should. We'll get into that in just a minute. But let's welcome you and make you now even more comfortable than ever. Because we go around the African continent every week, we land on one country, and then we have a proverb from that country every day for 5 days. Mark will tell you where we are, he'll tell you the proverb, and then we would like to hear your interpretation of it.
All right.
Okay.
So we're in a cocoa growing country. Mm-hmm. It has a lot of gold, it's said. And it also has one of the highest rates of child labor and slavery, actually. Mm-hmm. Can you guess which country it is?
It's ringing some bells.
Some bells,
yeah.
eh?
Mm-hmm.
The bell I should ring is Ghana. Mm-hmm. It should ring Akwaba. So as it rings Akwaba is hello. as it rings Ghana, what they say, one of the sayings is, let not what you cannot do tear you from what you can do. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Let what you cannot
that?
Do
tear you from away from what you can do.
What do I think of that?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, we always talk about how one person can make a difference. When it comes to things, we always stop ourselves or prevent ourselves from taking action, thinking how can one man make a difference, or one tiny portion in the ocean, how would that make a difference? So that's what the bell rings in my mind.
Yeah, that you can make a difference.
Yeah, do what you can and let things take their natural course from there.
Absolutely.
That's powerful, actually. Powerful.
Mm-hmm. It is. So, as we get into it's a difficult one to talk about. When we talk about the most vulnerable in society, children are along that line. And when we look at the law around labor and the rights of children, the thought in the minds of many is that you birth these children and so they belong to you, and then you can do with them as you wish. And that they then must do as you wish in the manner in which you command. We have heard many things, that people have many a child so that they can help them work. We know that when we look around the continent, there are those who, in a time gone by, had many children so that they could help them later on farm, which was their way of life. And they needed that assistance. They didn't have the extra to pay other people to come and work for them unless they were wealthy. So children, in addition to the family, were also an addition towards labor. Incoming laws then said, actually, you know what? That's great that they're your children. However, within the jurisdictions that we operate, we're not going to allow you just to do anything with them. And that laws then were established on the correct conduct. It would make suggestions, it would then implement, and then it would then legalize some of these suggestions. Which brings us to the place where we are now, where essentially we're in the reality that you can't just birth them and then do what you want. What does the law say? And I know it's really broad, but where are we now when we're talking about child rights and labor law? From that offset, what are we allowed and what are we not allowed to do?
Okay. So maybe I'll start off from the Constitution of Kenya. Obviously, we talk about human dignity. And when we talk about human dignity, we talk about the fact that every person has the right to human dignity. Children, of course, fall within that ambit too. As our future, as the nation's future, the world's future, children have certain rights, and we have certain responsibilities towards them that we need to fulfill or actualize. So that's a great starting point. Yes, traditionally in many African countries, I can talk about many Asian countries too, children were birthed or seen as a way to, take care of parents once the parents age, help parents on the fields or farms, agriculture being one of the main source of incomes, etc. But there has been a lot of development and a lot of changes. Kenya is party to a lot of international legal frameworks, like the UNCRC, which is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which means that the best interest of the child has to take center stage. Same thing is said in the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. So things like that should form considerations or be key considerations that we can take into account. When it comes down to labor, we can look into the Children's Act 2022, which was pretty progressive. It was passed to bring Kenya in line with Article 53 and our responsibilities under Article 53, which involve, like I said, the best interest of the child, the need for education, healthcare, shelter. So parents do have responsibilities to their children. And when we move to the Employment Act, Part 7, if I'm not wrong, talks about the protection of children, which prohibits labor or children from working if they're below the age of 13, number one. Number two, if you're between the age of 13 to 16, you can work, but it has to be light labor, meaning labor in terms of stuff that's not too intensive or exploitative to the child. And they shouldn't hinder their right to an education, and it shouldn't cause any physical harm to the child. So yes, protections like those are in place.
Just a quick question. When you say light duties, and I'm thinking of my son Xavier, I hope he's listening because he's 13. Is things, let's talk practical things. So washing clothes, right? Is that light labor or not? Cooking, is that light labor or not? Washing the house, is that hard labor or not? What is the definition of this thing called light labor? Mostly I just send him for water downstairs. I'm thinking of expanding his CV a little bit, his terms of staying in my house.
Okay, light labor is something, like we've said, that will not hinder their right to an education or them being able to pursue an education, number one. Number two, it should be work that causes no physical harm to the child or their development. Washing clothes, stuff like that, at a certain age, maybe it counts as light labor, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. So taking it from there used to be a tradition in this country, and I don't know whether you're old enough to remember, Dennis, is...
Wow.
Please continue.
I'm giving him his flowers, that he looks much younger than me. There used to be this thing where there'll be a relative at home who's either deceased or happens to be living in poor conditions, and what would happen is those relatives living in Nairobi will send for the children to come, and then the children, as they come to Nairobi, they're half house workers and half students. What's the legal standing of such things?
Oh,
It's still
okay,
Dennis.
it's still me.
I'm just reminding Dennis, but the question is yours.
Okay. The legal standing of children. Again, there is prohibited work. 13 to 16 is the age they can work at.
Yeah.
And the legal standing would then be that as long as it doesn't hinder their education and it's not causing physical harm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
You see, when you talk about the children and their right to education, and pretty much just the right of the children, this takes me to a story that we covered on the Standard, which says, and I'll just quote what the governor said: on Wednesdays, the market is full of children, some still in school uniforms selling produce. Some of them told me their parents had sent them. That is according to Karani. Now, you go to the streets of Nairobi every day and you find we have children who should be in schools. They are hawking, and at that point, when you ask them, do you go to school? No, I don't go to school. Why? Because I've been sent here by my mom because we need food at home. And one would want to ask, at that point when they have to live, they have to eat. Parents cannot provide. At that point, is a parent committing a crime?
Okay. The law does not necessarily say it's a crime. There are responsibilities imposed on parents, right? Like providing for the basic education, food, shelter, protection, etc. The right to a name of a child, nationality, etc. All that comes in. But in terms of criminalizing it, I don't think any steps have been taken. Yes. But they are the obligations on the parent to provide for the child. Yes.
So let's take a look at education and the children who actually go to the streets every day, and I see them, begging for coins and things like that. Now, there's the right to education, right? Yes. That's one side of the law. There's the responsibility of the parent to actually take the child to school. And these children are saying, you know what, I am hungry. If I don't do this, I'll get beaten and things like that. So tell us, what exactly should we do when you see a child like that? What is the procedure? Is there, we watch movies and there's child protective services, and they come and they show up and they take care of the child and they put them under temporary custodianship with an uncle or a stepdad or something like that. And it's all efficient and things like that. How is that situation for Kenya? What is the right step to do when you do see either a child being abused or a child, like the example I've been given, not going to school because a parent forces them to actually come to smile at my window and ask me for money? What is the legal response that Kenyans should have?
Okay, so child welfare services have been established in Kenya.
Yeah.
And that means when we do see stuff like this happening, we should report it.
Yeah.
I guess the problem comes in the fact that it's something so normal or prevalent that we see today in society that we forget that children have rights to education and rights to certain protections, which means we don't report such stuff. Maybe the first step would be public education and awareness to inform them about the rights of the children, how they should be in school rather than on the streets hawking, etc. And we can start there. Then the next step would be obviously reporting, where if we're now aware, we know that the next step to take is to contact child welfare services, and then they can take up the matter from there.
Okay.
I'm very interested in that last thing that you've just said about child welfare services. Under which department do child welfare services in Kenya fall?
They fall under, if I'm not wrong, it's under the Children's Act. There is the National Council on Child Welfare, if I'm not wrong.
So does this fall in the under the Children's Department?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we see cases where so the whole idea of children's homes and all of these centers then fall under this department. We know the current state of those particular facilities. So when we are making a report, when anybody as a concerned citizen is making a report and they say, well, I see these 7, 8, 9-year-olds selling groundnuts at the time where they should be in school. The truth of the matter is that they may sell those groundnuts on the street, but they go home at the end of the day and they have, even if it is one meal they have, they don't go to school. What's to guarantee, or what would be the action that would be taken if you report that case and we remove them from a home where there could be two parents and we take them to a state department whereby what is guaranteed?
Okay. So when issues are forwarded to the State Department or within the law itself, they talk about the best interest of the child. That is always the central consideration. So they will consider, yes, or is this child growing up in a house that's maybe unable to provide for them, etc. And they will consider, are there relatives or people who can take them up? Are there services the state can offer, or alternative forms of guidance, like maybe guardianship or a relative taking care of that child? That comes in. But the dilemma is we live in a country where service delivery isn't as ideal as it should be. So we do have these protections within the law, but on the ground, the reality is still lagging behind.
So then one must ask,
Yes.
can we really talk about the need to implement a law where the implementation mechanisms or metrics don't exist? How do we say that we must enforce labor laws, we must enforce child rights, where there are certain things that don't happen? Can we not also speak about the abrogation of the rights of their parents who cannot do 1, 2, 3, that should then an environment have been created conducive enough by state to ensure that certain things can happen? That if there was 1,000 shillings that was called upon for these children to go to school, parents couldn't afford that. Upon whose shoulders do we place that particular blame? How do we enforce law when implementation metrics don't exist? How do we do that?
Obviously, there is, let's call it systematic or institutional failures that exist. There have been overhauls of a lot of systems, and we are slowly trying to progress towards actualizing more rights. But when it comes to service delivery and the actualization of social and cultural economic rights, that isn't necessarily as fruitful as it should be. One metric we do use for comparisons is maybe more developed countries like the European states, etc. But yes, we are lagging behind. However, the laws have created the guidelines. We just need to start implementing the laws in both the informal sectors and the formal sectors so that some change can be brought about.
You see, we talk about the rights of children under the law and the frameworks that have been put in place to ensure that the rights of a child is actually upheld. But as we talk about the offering of services, is something that is not even lacking; it's just non-existent.
Yes.
You know, because today you will go to the streets, you will see a child, and it's a concern that a lot of people have. If you speak to anyone, a child should be in school, but first of all, there is no knowledge that have been shared for Kenyans to know this is where I go. So from the word go, you see the child, you pity them, but that's the farthest you can go because there is no information in terms of child services, where the officers are. If you go to a police station, is there a police officer who's trained to handle a child and be able to take them through the processes that they do require? And then again, there is the aspect of fine. That child is on the streets, should be in school. But if you go back home, as Ndua said, there is nothing else this child can do other than be on the streets because the parents cannot provide for them. So at that point, isn't the state itself failing to ensure that the rights of the child is upheld?
Yes, we can see a failure to an extent.
We can be real. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's fine.
Yes.
You're fine. We can say it as it is because that's a conversation that we are dealing with this morning, is it not?
Yes, it is. So we can see that failure, obviously. There are failures in the education sector, health sector, provision of general services to the children. Obviously, this comes from failures towards the adults who are then responsible for these kids. So yes, it starts at maybe the higher level and stems down or trickles down to the lower level. So it's widespread.
Well, to give you a bit of good news, is there's actually a child helpline, and you can dial 116 on your phone, and it will give you all the vital services you need. I can see Aseto dialing it, so soon we shall prove. Now, the Directorate of Children's Services does exist under the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection, and Aseto is calling. Let us put it on speaker so we hear whether it rings.
Yeah, it's working.
It rings.
Yeah, 116. So let's see if someone picks up.
Okay.
And
I will let you know.
You let us know what happens.
Let us know. So, yes, Kenya is making steps towards actually making children protective services and something that is front and center. Now, let's take it back to the home, a normal setting. Let's talk about the punishment of children, right? Is belts still considered a punishment, or is it going to be sit in the corner and think about what you've done? And be careful, we are Christians. Spare the rod, spoil the child.
Okay.
Yes, but however,
Yes.
is a form of punishment where you're beating or harming your child, the best way to go about it. What about the guilt you feel after as a parent too?
Who
I can
feels?
tell you,
You don't feel it?
we are Africans. My mom never felt guilt, and I don't think she does.
Okay, but generations have changed. Leave your mom out of it. What about you as a parent?
Me as a parent.
Don't you feel some remorse after or go to your son?
No, let me tell you, whatever time you have to administer punishment to your child, whether it's going to sit in their room or taking away their gadgets, it does hurt. You do love them, right? But there are things that are necessary to be done. Now, the question is that the African philosophy is that corporal punishment is part and parcel of being a parent. In fact, if you are not properly whipped, we say sometimes that you are spoiled. So what does the law say about it?
Okay, corporal punishment is no longer allowed.
Okay.
Is it against the law? Or is it no longer allowed in suggestion? Or we generally say in boardrooms, let's not do it anymore. But is it against the law? If somebody in my daughter's school, for example, takes a hiding to my daughter, right? Can I take this person to the police station and they be arrested? Or can the police come, whatever the case, and they be presented in a court of law? Is it against the law?
I believe it is. Yes.
You know, we've heard words like it is frowned upon, it is no longer encouraged.
Yes.
Those are things that are suggestions. But in the law, is there a part of the law, and I'm actually very interested to hear, is there a part of the law that says the law disallows 1, 2, 3 to happen in this context? Because a lot of things are being taken into hands. We've seen horrifying videos of things that happen to children. And then we say, well, okay, maybe somebody will be arrested for causing bodily harm and all of this. But is there an understanding that it's like if you rob a bank and you're caught, it is clear what will happen. If you beat somebody's child in school mercilessly, is it clear what will happen to you?
No.
Okay.
Yes. No. Okay. However, I know we're trying to move towards more of a rehabilitative and restorative justice system, especially when it comes to children. Why be punitive when we have a moral duty to, educate and teach the children about wrongdoings in a better way? Yes. So punitive actions are frowned upon, like you've said, and corporal punishment is not allowed, disallowed.
Yeah, actually, if you read the Constitution of Kenya 2010, Article 29 prohibits all forms of torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment encompassing corporal punishment. Now you go to Children's Act 2022, and the Act explicitly repeals the previous allowance of reasonable punishment by parents or guardians. Section 25(3)(b) and C criminalizes corporal punishment by any person aligning with international human rights standards. So, Mark, you've been breaking the law.
I know. Let me tell you, the fact is that if you look at corporal punishment and all it encompasses, right, a lot of the punishments that are meted out on Kenyan children are illegal, right? Whether at home or at school or
that's what we are saying.
But the question then begs, a child lives in a one-bedroom shack with the parents. What are the punishment options that are not dehumanizing? The question is to you.
Okay, I thought it was just, food for thought. Okay. Wow. It is a bit tough. However, would you not have a conversation with your child? Are they not at a stage to understand that what they have done is wrong? And you explain to them the wrongdoings rather than going there and using your belt or whipping them.
Okay, I think we should take a break at this point and let's come back and look at the origin of discipline and when that it was beyond using words for discipline and where that actually came. That there is a connection between what you feel physically and then an action that was deemed bad that you would then repeat. There's a connection between the two. It's psychological, that if you cause some kind of physical pain, that the likelihood of the repetition of this action then reduces. And I don't know if that's something, it's a science, it's a formula. My mother can tell you that if you were going to do it again, you would think twice because you remember that thing and you wouldn't do it again. The problem that we have is that there is a power wielding mechanism in that thing that inflicts this pain that sometimes gets out of control. And in an attempt to instill these controls is when the law comes in. But people have taken it too far. Now, the question is it in that too far that we are now trying to bring in the law? We'll come back and continue with that conversation. It's around about 27 minutes to 9 o'clock. We're having a conversation around child rights and labor laws, what you can or cannot actually do with children, whether they're in the home setting, whether they are in the school setting. And Rimsha Firozdin is an associate legal and transitional justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. So obviously there's a balance that needs to be created here. And I'm trying to imagine myself growing up in Engineer and Patience Oku's house. And I'm sleeping, and there are dishes to be washed, and there are clothes that I wore to be washed, or there's some kind of cleanliness that needs to be upheld, and I'll wake up and tell Engineer Oko, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do that because that's child labor. You will face the cane. Do you understand what I'm saying? There needs to be a balance between the two. And so when we say that it didn't deny me going to school. I went to some of the best schools. It didn't deny me that. I got an education. But you know what I also got later is that I am an adult today who can make sure that the spaces around me are clean, that I can get along without any help. But we are slowly degenerating, in my opinion, into a society whereby you are afraid to even tell your own child to get something done because they could call Rimsha and say, in my house, people are subjecting me to labor.
Yeah.
Are we not getting to that place where it's very possible to say, no, I can't do that. It's child labor. You're supposed to educate me, feed me, and then send me off into the world. These are the things that you're telling me to do. We can call police. That's what we're saying.
Okay. So, when we talk about the responsibilities of parents, we do have the basic responsibilities we've been speaking about, like education and feeding, nutrition. But parents also have a moral responsibility towards their children. And, that includes bringing them up teaching them what good is, teaching them what bad is, right? Equipping them with responsibilities so tomorrow they can go out into the world and be responsible adults. And that is when maybe disciplining them comes in. However, times are changing, in my opinion. And this new generation is more well aware of their rights, etc. They claim it's child labor. But at the same time, wouldn't it then be better, rather than taking off the belt or hitting them with the cane, to sit down and have a conversation with them saying, these are your responsibilities or stuff like that, rather than raising your hand?
I love the way you speak of it with such simplicity and conviction. And I'm sure many parents who are listening to us are like, have you had a child? Have you had my child? Specifically mine. This one of mine,
Yeah.
The question is, and I think for many parents, especially modern parents, it's the issue of balance, right? Because there are things that you will talk to your child about, and generally speaking, the parents I do know, including myself and my friends, the first call to do anything about your child is to talk to them. Listen, you're not going just to leave your socks hanging out everywhere and things like that. And sometimes, either because of teenage influence or whatever, the child will decide to double down, and now you've got 3 pairs of socks in the same place staring at you. And the parents say, okay, you know what, I'm taking away your phone, you will not have it for the next 1 week, 24 hours, whatever. And then the child doesn't change, right? Then after you took away the phone privileges, you say now you are locked down, no this, no this, no that. Doesn't work, right? Then you take a belt and then you do pa, just once. And
Wait, on the table.
on a flat surface, on a conveniently flat surface. Right? And then suddenly the child understands and is able to see that what they've been trying to be told throughout this period actually makes sense, because now there's a serious punishment to it. So the question is, and because we know for a fact in this country corporal punishment continues with almost reckless abandon, is there a balance to be reached?
Okay, in the house setting,
Yes.
let's talk there. As parents,
Yes.
maybe, just maybe, there is a balance to be reached.
Yeah.
However, don't you think that should be the last final resort if nothing else has worked? And again, the least amount of harm you can inflict upon the child.
True.
Obviously, like we've said, they have human dignity. They're growing up and going out into the world. If they start associating punishment with action, I don't think that's the best way to send someone out into the world. Yes, it worked for the previous generations, but
I don't know that it did, but okay.
You guys say you grew up and turned out just fine.
A product of
I mean, what I'm saying is that if we look at the boundaries that were pushed, we have functioning or, to an extent, dysfunctional adults today
Yes, true.
who grew up in situations whereby the punishment pushed the boundaries, and were not able to make the connection between that situation and what they exhibit today. And it is a direct connection.
No, true.
And that's what I'm saying, that we don't know that are they properly. I am saying that in certain situations, if I was not, if certain ways of life were not insisted upon me to the way they were, I would be a basket case. I would not be able to do my own things. I would not be able to operate. And we even have a comment here from Hannah Wain who says, you know what? Chores help children become responsible. I am clean, tidy, and a great planner because of the chores I was encouraged to do. And today, I have passed on the same to my child or my children. But you see, that's why I think that question of balance is extremely important, because how do you strike the balance? We are not saying that now you will do this work, you will not go to school until you finish all of it. And when you come back, until you finish that, you will not settle down and do your homework kind of thing. I don't think that is what we are saying. But then how do we create a balance? That I think that there are adults today who are living in some generational trauma over things that they experienced in school and things that they experienced at home.
Let me confess.
See the counselor to my left.
Let me confess.
You know?
There's a school I went to. It is near Maseno. See what I did? So that school, to this day, when I'm stressed, I dream about that school. Because there was no water. Punishments were issued with, it was like fun to issue punishments. I remember I was punished because my shirt was always dirty because the place is hot, and I was born in Nakuru.
There was
Joro,
no water.
how cold it was. So now I'm sweating. Yeah, I'm sweating more, and then plus there's no water even to wash the damn shirt he was punishing me for. As in, surely, Kwanza, I cannot mention you.
You see, trauma.
Trauma.
You see, what I hear you speak is, if you look at the common African setting, we're dealing with two things, which is the culture that you've been brought up on and the norms that we know about. If it's about corporal punishment, Mzee Aseto would hand it down proper. You know what I mean? My dad would just hand it down. But when you look back and what that did, because my dad is a clean freak, you would not leave your things on the table and expect that you will not get it from him. But you look at what that has done to me right now, it has made me be a clean freak and just love my space clean, But you're talking about a generation that I know my rights. The government has said, the Children's Act says A, B, C, D. But then again, there is need as well for parents, because even the Constitution says it is the role of a parent to instill discipline to their children. You know what I mean? So at that point, it is important to create the balance that you're talking about, such that I've talked to you 4 times, 5 times, you're not listening. A flat surface and a belt might work, could work.
You're making Rimsha start to shake. Rimsha is shaking, saying what?
But then again, there is also the conversation that is happening around on the need for parents and the children to have a conversation around, especially parents. We form a group and find what form of punishment in this new generation works best for the society,
Yes. Like you guys have been talking about, obviously you've seen the effects of generational trauma caused by these punishments.
However,
on the other hand, we are dealing with, let's call it, a more well-informed but stubborn generation who know their rights or have social media, number one, that informs them of certain rights they have, maybe misinforms them in some scenarios and instances too. So we do need to strike that balance in between where you find the perfect form of, let's not call it punishment, or the perfect form of having that conversation with your child. Yeah.
You know, I think, and maybe stop me from a legal point of view, that here we are, and I think that there is an element across board of discipline and order that is maintained between parents and their children. You see these crazy videos we see of people who are whipping children and doing horrific things to them.
Yes.
Those are people with issues who belong in jail. Those are deviants.
Yes.
Those are people who ought to be punished themselves in a manner 10 times worse than that they're inflicting on children. There is something wrong with those people, and they are deviant, and they are actually the minority. That there are parents who are instilling order. There are parents who are instilling discipline. That there are parents who are saying that this way you must stick to it. Because, Rimsha, if children are impressionable, but guess what? They are also impressionable, meaning that they know the boundaries that they can push. So you can imagine what would happen if you leave them unattended. The same way you don't provide food, if you don't provide order, things will go haywire. For sure. The question that we ask ourselves, because isn't that what the law does, whether you're dealing with children's rights, whether you're dealing with criminals, is that there is a boundary that you then cannot cross. We should be looking at, and maybe again, please help us here, we should be looking at what parameters are we setting up so that these boundaries are not crossed, because when we cross the boundaries is where we have a problem. You know, we dealt with an issue of a child in school who was beaten to the point where she had welts on her back by a teacher. Now, that teacher, when it was double-clicked, had issues and had to be removed from the school system because there was something wrong with him. Now, that's what I'm saying. Those people are in the minority. But for us to say that the realization of the rights of children is over and above the order and discipline which is necessary at a certain age, then I think is now where we're also crossing the boundary. So how do we do all of these things within the boundary set by law? How? And I think that's what we're asking.
Okay. So, number one, obviously, the consideration that's at the fore is always the best interest of the child, including their development, their physical health, etc., right? We cannot deprive them of certain rights, but we do have a responsibility towards them to bring them up in the correct way. So the law does provide these certain things, also telling us about parental responsibilities within the Children's Act. So that's where we strike the balance. The teacher coming in, like we say, corporal punishment is not allowed, right? It forms human torture and abuse. So maybe that's where we need to draw the line. What's the difference between a slight form of discipline and where does abuse come in?
Where does it?
Like you say, the child who had welts on her back, that is obviously abuse. Maybe something that bruises the child or causes harm to the child, grievous harm, that's abuse. Yeah. A slight smack to the arm or something like that, would that count as
I
from a
can
parent?
see you're even so uncomfortable with that slight smack. You're unable.
From a parent, maybe, but as a teacher or someone who has to educate you, your educator, I don't think so. I feel like maybe the only person who should be allowed to discipline the child physically should be a parent.
I agree on that as well.
It shouldn't go further than that.
True.
Yes.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about neglect, right? Because there's honestly forms of neglect that are quite subtle. For example, the kids who never see their parents, they're picked by the bus at 5 a.m., dropped back at 4 a.m., father, mother check in at 9 p.m. and they're just basically bringing themselves up.
Yeah.
Is that neglect?
Again, I think it comes down to the circumstances. Maybe the parents are struggling to make ends meet.
No, most parents
Yes.
who do this are not struggling
They're not.
at
So
all.
on Sunday they take them out.
No,
the whole
don't
day.
take them out.
They give
The
them
parents
money.
drink beer here,
Yeah.
and then the children
Are playing
bounce on
over
a
there.
castle over there. Yeah.
Well, then, that is neglect to an extent, but more of moral neglect or neglect of certain responsibilities, because yes, they are providing the education, the shelter, the food,
Yeah.
but what about the other responsibilities you have
Yeah.
towards the child, like care, attention, right? Affection, stuff like that also comes in.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is neglect in certain ways if you look at it like that, and it does have an effect on the children.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Yeah, and a quick question: the shared custody, I think, co-parenting thing in this country, where most of the time it's a dad who has weekend visitation rights, and then you see them at Java in the morning. It's always so interesting where they're just two quiet people eating breakfast quietly. One question here, one question there. Is that really the standard of co-parenting that the law provides for, or should there be more involvement of this co-parent? Because a lot of the guys who say I'm spending time with my son or daughter, to me it's the most ridiculous thing. I think it's because I live with my kids, but I don't consider that co-parenting. I think it's just visiting. Yeah.
It's definitely not the best way to go about co-parenting, because you do have that responsibility towards your child, number one. Number two, maybe it's a struggle to form that bond while not being around towards maybe the daily chores or the daily events of your kid. So that disconnect is where that bond doesn't form. And yeah, that's maybe why it comes around as more as visiting rather than co-parenting.
So there is the aspect that Mark had raised earlier in terms of children who don't see their parents, and there's a term out there, the kids who've been raised by the society. They've been raised by the world, because fine, the parents are there, but they're not there. The parents' responsibility is to provide education, food, shelter, period. The other is your teachers, your driver, and your friends. And one would look at later in life, and this child has no connection to the parents. And at that point is the realization strikes that I do not know the child that I'm living with in the house. So in terms of making sure that a parent is involved even when there are busy schedules and whatnot, how should they go about it in glaring at economic situation that we have and parents need to provide for their children? Because a parent at that point thinks I'm providing everything that is needed to that child.
Okay. So personally, I cannot speak from personal experience. I am not raising children yet.
Don't worry, when you get there, we'll be here.
When you get there, you'll have our numbers.
Yeah.
I'll call you back.
Yes.
But personally, for now, currently, I always believe that I was fortunate enough to grow up with a mother who stayed home to, raise the children. So stuff like that does make a difference. But then again, yes, there is the need for work-life balance. But with increasing economic tough times and stuff like that, and you have to provide for the child at the same time, that's very tough responsibilities to shoulder. You just need to figure out what works for you. If you're around your child, then how about you give your full attention to your child at that point then? Yeah, form that bond, have those conversations, find out about their day, rather than sitting around on your phone and having your child next to you. Try form that bond then.
Do you think the law should follow the current function of the state? I'm not talking about Kenya, I'm talking about the state. It can be any country. That when laws are being formed, when legislation is happening, that or even when interpretation is happening, that the current happenings around the country should be taken into consideration. For example, you talk about the fact that labor laws are very stringent when it comes to what you can do as a child, that you should not be on the farm between how many hours working. But we also then realize that the same law also says that the protection of livelihoods of the people then is guaranteed under the Constitution, right? So that at the very least they should be able to get 1, 2, 3 meals a day. But this meal that they would get is protected and guaranteed by this work that is being done. It is the case for a lot of people. There are comments here, people say, somebody said, I once bought an entire watermelon from a girl on the street because I wanted her to finish the thing and go home. There are people who say that, why are you on the street at 8:30? Because my mom says if I don't finish selling these bananas, I don't come back home. You see? But the situation which this parent is in at that time requires some shillings in the hand. Does the law take into consideration what is happening before these laws or before this legislation takes place?
Okay. So one thing that we do have is that the law is playing catch up most of the time, right? Things happen in society and then the law is catching up. So currently, does the law take into account what is happening or what is the reality? Maybe in forms of allowing light labor. Yes, it does. But is that necessarily the case? Not necessarily, but that should change. The situation of the day is what should inform the law to an extent.
Just a quick one. You know, I'm thinking about this light labor thing, and I'm thinking about, you know, American movies where kids are mowing lawns to be paid. Some of them are getting part-time jobs at Mickey D's, and they're flipping burgers over the weekend and things like that. Does Kenya consider that light labor? So I can send off my child on Saturday and Sunday. I'm like, you know what? You're going to KFC. You're going to be their waiter for the day. You know, and then you're going to earn a bit of money, and then that's going to go into your college fund. Is that light labor?
Light labor is something your 13 to 16-year-old can do, right?
They can definitely clean tables and pick up those KFC papers.
However, it's not something like full-time, what is it called, employment. It has to be more of an oral contract where they are performing certain duties. But yes, stuff like formal employment, I'm not too sure.
Okay.
So there is something that some of our listeners are asking in terms of, there is an aspect where the current life that people live in, it's so busy. Parents have no time for their children, and they decide that the only way for me to give my child the best is send them to boarding school. What effect does that have to a child? Getting rid of them simply because things are tough.
You know, there are two ways to look at it. Sometimes some children want to go off to boarding school. It has happened in very rare cases. That should be considered, but obviously a child shouldn't feel like they're being shipped off and sent away because the parents can't shoulder their responsibility or something like that. So you need to consider, again, have those conversations with your children, right? Number two, find a place that would fit, something that would be a right fit, somewhere they could develop, grow, etc., not feel neglected. Yeah.
With the introduction of this law, even as we wrap up this, with the introduction of these laws over time, have we seen that things have increased, or rather have things gotten better? Or are we seeing that there is more and more adoption of some of these things and acclimatization to what the law requires?
We're gradually getting there. Yes. Slowly, we're making progress, right? So best interests of children are being considered more. Yes, we can see cases in informal areas, etc., where children are still facing lots of different issues. There's child labor, there's neglect, there's lots of different issues children are facing. And obviously with the digital era, there's the onset of new potential offenses against children, right? So stuff like that is coming in, but we're trying.
Will we get to a place whereby it is understood that the boundaries then have to actually be drawn across board, across social strata, where folks are thinking about bread and butter issues and really not about, the morals? Can we get to a place where it's understood across board?
Isn't that something that we'd have to take up as a community or society then? Have those conversations, start understanding our duties, understanding their rights, etc. So that's what it comes down to then.
Indeed. We want to thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I mean, it's good to open up these conversations and to talk about them. What is the reality on the ground? How then do we get to a place where we create a balance between what we practice and what we hope to aspire to? Rimsha Firozdin is an associate legal and transitional justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. We'll be talking.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.